Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join in the commendations and acknowledgements that have been given to persons who have carried the reparation cause over these many years to now where it seems that the government of Jamaica, and indeed governments in CARICOM, will be taking a more direct and positive approach towards the reparation movement. Mr. Speaker, let me acknowledge the work that has been done by Professor Barish Evans and now by Professor Vereen Shepherd. But I would also like to make special acknowledgement of the work that has been done by the Rastafari movement in Jamaica, who boldly took their claim internationally. And we also acknowledge people like Dudley Thompson, who has always been an advocate for reparations. In that light, I would also like to acknowledge our own member from Central Clarendon, Mr. Mike Henry, Jamaica, who has worked long and hard and has been someone who has carried the cause for a long time. Mr. Speaker, much has been said, and I don't need to remake points that have already been well made. I want to focus on one important point, which is covered in the resolution. Slavery and the injustices of slavery cannot and should never be measured in dollars and cents or pounds and shillings. Indeed, it cannot be. The reparations debate is not about money. It is about a process of acknowledging that a terrible wrong was done to a race, to a people, and that those who did the wrong must come up front and acknowledge it, and by their own conscience should seek to right that wrong. The reparations debate, Mr. Speaker, has nothing to do with time. It doesn't matter how many centuries ago this happened. As long as we acknowledge that it is a wrong, the generations that have come and gone and the generation that now exists has a duty to make the wrong that happened into a right. They have to correct. And I would say, Mr. Speaker, that there is a view that how can the compensation that is required in the reparations debate be effective? It has happened so long ago. People are dead. You can't hold me responsible for what my ancestors did. But you know, Mr. Speaker, in the particular debate about the reparations for slavery, what I've found to be very curious, the British government paid £20 million to the owners of slaves. 10 million went to slave owners directly in its colonies, and 10 million pounds went to absentee slave owners in Britain. The University of London and other academics conducted a study. They pulled together 46,000 records of compensation, and they were able to list Victorian families, British families during the Victorian period, who some were British MPs, including the Prime Minister, and including the father of a former Prime Minister some time ago. Quite possible. But, Mr. Speaker, it is now a matter of record that we can identify persons whose families and ancestors benefited from slavery, and you can now make a connection between the wealth of those families and trace it right back to the compensation of slavery. So it is not a debate that has to get into the realm of any esoteric details about, well, how do you know that the profit from the plantation went back to Britain to build mansions? We don't have to engage in that. There is a starting point. The British government took up £20 million and just handed it over to anyone who owned slaves and asked for compensation. You have to juxtapose that, Mr. Speaker. A little bit of history is necessary. The abolitionist movement in the British, in Britain, was very active. And when it came to the point that the British Parliament was now ready, having abolished the slave trade, now ready to abolish slavery, felt that a little incentive was needed. So the debate at the time was, well, to the planters, don't worry, when we abolish slavery, there will still be a period of apprenticeship. There will be still laws to keep slaves in check, hence the Vagrancy Act, and we will compensate you. So that was the sweetener for the abolition of slavery. When the Abolition of Slavery Act was passed, in that act as well was something called the Negro Education Grant. And the Negro Education Grant was £30,000 per year, starting in 1835, I believe it was, for 5 years. It never really got up to that. Maybe in the first or second year, they did get the £30,000. But after that, it consistently declined. And then they agreed, the British government agreed that they would extend it for a further 5 years. So in total, the only thing that you could say that the slaves got as any form of compensation would be maybe £200,000 through the Negro Education Grant. And even then, it didn't go to the slaves. It went to the missionaries. It went to the churches, because the missionaries took it up. And that's how we have the schools that we have today. I go through that history to make the point that had the British government spent more resources, the schools that we have today, many of them benefited from the Negro Education Grant, the MICO, the Dickinson Trust, many of them benefited. Had more resources been spent, we would have had stronger, better institutions that would have built a stronger, better society. So there is an argument for compensation. And it is not a complex argument. It is a very simple argument. We know who the persons are. The British government obviously valued and placed a cost on slavery by giving this compensation. It is about, some people estimated that it would be somewhere in the region of £1 billion. I don't hold me to that figure. Actuarial studies would have to be done to see what the actual net present value of that 20 million, what it would be. Of the British government or any other colonizers to seek to give back in a consequential and significant way resources to, whether it is our education system, whether it is to our national security system, whether it is to investment in our economy. I think it is well within the scope of certainly the British government to do this. So I wholeheartedly support and endorse the resolution brought by the member from Central Clarendon, and I hope that the Parliament will vote as a whole and vote in one voice in support of this resolution. May it speak, please you, Mr. Speaker.